order, and we will follow the agenda as posted, beginning with item 2.01. Over the last month or two, we have received some updates from the state level on the status of OEI. Tonight, this afternoon rather, Mr. Ringer is here to provide us with a formal update on OEI, and then to answer any questions that we may have about next steps, if any. Okay, Mr. Ringer?
Well, the report is sort of anticlimactic because the big news was this summer we learned in June that we had won the OEI litigation and the circuit court had declared the act unconstitutional. The court's final order putting that to record was entered the 1st of July. Then 2 or 3 months after that, 2 or 3 weeks after that, the governor announced that the state was not going to appeal that decision. Then there was a little flurry of activity, and it looked like OEI had hired its own counsel to go to an appeal. But the time to file a petition for appeal was the 1st of October, and that time passed without their filing, and then we got a letter from the new OEI counsel saying they were not going to pursue the appeal. So the OEI litigation is finally concluded in our favor and in favor of the Virginia School Board Association. The court, in its order of the 1st of July, enjoined OEI from taking over anyone's schools in the state or from doing anything otherwise to act per the legislative determination. So OEI, as far as we're concerned, for any practical purpose, is a dead letter. Now, that doesn't mean that they might come along with some new legislation that will do something different, but what they did, the court has very plainly held to be unconstitutional.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Dr. Stewart.
I was the person who requested this concluding conversation. On June the 10th, we had a joint announcement from Virginia School Boards Association and the Norfolk Public Schools, and I appreciated that very much, and I've appreciated the work of you and your colleagues and Pat Lacey in his office in Virginia School Boards. The question I would have was, does this board want to have anything to say as a concluding resolution, a concluding statement of this, along with the Virginia School Boards Association? And going back to the beginning of this, when originally it was declared that the state would do something it had never done before, therefore had no success at doing, would take over schools, we said we didn't think it was best for students. Over 100 school systems, and now I can't tell you of 134 how many joined us. They didn't join us in official lawsuits, but joined us with letters of support. Do you remember how many? 120 maybe?
I remember when it passed 100, but
yeah, it passed 100.
beyond that.
They said, yep, you're right. This is not the best thing for the students that we serve. On the date of the court hearing, the judge here in Norfolk asked a very pertinent question, and that pertinent question was, state, is this the only thing you can do to help these students? I thought that was a critical question. So now we find ourselves at this point, finally with this wrong-headed move concluded, based on the lack of appeal at this point, could go on, that we must answer the question, what else can we do to help these students do better? We're having conversations now regarding milestones, things that the board has taken over the past 5 or 6 years that could answer that question. So my reason for wanting to put a punctuation mark on the ending of this was that question remains with me. What are we going to do as a city of Norfolk to help these students, because we know they need more? I propose that the second part of our milestones conversation has some possible fruit in it. Dr. King and his colleagues may have other possible fruit, but my question, the reason for raising it, if it's over for now, do we want to make a joint statement from the Virginia School Boards Association, from the Norfolk Public School, about what it is we are going to do? That's what the judge asked. And I'm really pleased that you assisted us so much, and really pleased that those over 100 school systems and the Norfolk Public Schools stood up and said, this isn't the way to go. Thanks for indulging me.
Sure. Does your question come with a recommendation?
It really comes with a question to the governance team, Dr. King and the school board members. Is there a desire on our part? And I've already indicated, I hope that our milestones conversation and other things from the superintendent that will find its way into the strategic plan, that there is a new set of things that we're going to do what the state said it was going to try, had no success. Now, a former Department of Education employee myself, I know that our job was to provide technical assistance to help local school divisions. This was a departure that we thought was wrong. Over 100 school systems joined us and said they thought it was wrong. Now we've proven at least it's not necessarily that it's wrong, but it's unconstitutional. I just wanted to have a punctuation mark on, is this over, and what are we going to do next, and does the school system along with VSBA want to make a concluding statement regarding this?
Comments?
Yes. So what I think, we kind of talked about this when we decided to go down the path of the lawsuit. I mean, much of what needs to be done for children, we are doing and working to do better every day. So I think many of the efforts and initiatives that we're working on, that the superintendent already has proposed, that you talked about the master milestones, the training and everything else that we're undergoing already, I think is a part of that. You know, I was with members of the task force yesterday. We met with the governor and the secretary and presented some of the initial recommendations from the task force on schools in challenging environments, which has a whole slew of recommendations in there, some of which I stole from Norfolk Public Schools. So we have the summit that's going to come up in December. There'll be a track at the VSBA annual meeting like there was last year. So I think we're in the midst of it. And I would caution, rather than us seeing this as an opportunity to put a period, I just think it's a comma. And then there's still, you know, much more work for us to do for just the first sentence and the ones that follow. So I think that's our work every day. And so I'm not sure if we need a resolution, but I do think, I know one of the recommendations that we put in the task force report was to try to make sure that, you know, all school boards, legislators, people at the state really understood the conditions that exist for these children that are in these environments. And I can tell you that a lot of people think they know, but then when you get down in it, like we're in it, you find out something is much more difficult than something that you just do in 6 months or do with one particular action. So I think we're on that path, and perhaps as we continue to move along the way, we can just highlight and really talk about. We've already put on our agenda a special section to deal with it, and so I just think since we were there with VSBA with the lawsuit, we can just continue to provide some leadership and set some examples for the rest of the state to follow. So I think it's in the work rather than in some type of resolution.
You asked if I had a recommendation. I did not. I just wanted to know. But there is something very clear to me, is that with our legislative day coming up, where we're going to host on the 18th, the legislators, with Dr. King coming, originally wanting to begin school before Labor Day, and the silly resistance, I emphasize the word silly, resistance of allowing school systems to start, perhaps there's a recognition of this task force, Mr. Jordan, and some state leaders, the new state leaders, that perhaps some select school systems, in their effort to provide more learning time, which everyone says students in high poverty need, that perhaps there could come, you know, these folks at the State Department are our friends. They're people who can help us. They don't have to be our big bullies. They can be our big friends. That perhaps maybe our legislators on the 19th or before would decide to advocate for Norfolk Public Schools, and perhaps Petersburg and Richmond and any others with high poverty schools, be given special dispensation, if the Pope would agree, to allow us to do what we know we need to do, and that is, as one element of offering more time, is one of the milestones. So I think there's some other implications here, but the reason why I wanted to have the opportunity for a comma, semicolon, punctuation mark is that this was a big deal. We stood up and said, this isn't what will help kids learn. All of the school systems in the state of Virginia said, we agree. And now we've got to go forward and do something more. And we're having that conversation, correct? But perhaps the legislators can help us, and perhaps those folks that were asked to do something that they really weren't accustomed to doing can be part of the solution. But thanks for indulging me in getting a concluding report on this.
Thank you for the request and the thoughts associated with it. And I think that continuing this discussion with our legislators, especially as it relates to such a major item that's really in their hands to decide the more time issue starting before Labor Day. And I think that is a good part of this to take up as we continue our conversations with them.
One of the things, Dr. Stewart, since you mentioned Norfolk, Richmond, and Petersburg, Dr. King and Dr. Houston and I were in Petersburg when the governor made his announcement. But one of the things that the task force has impressed or tried to impress upon the governors and others, this is just not a Richmond, Petersburg, and Norfolk issue. I told them yesterday, I grew up in the Virginia Beach school system, and back in the dark ages, there were schools there that had challenges. And you look at the JGARC report and look at some of the issues, and the same schools there are still having some of the same challenges, and they don't look too different than Norfolk Public Schools. And so what the advantage that you have if you're in a affluent district is that you get to hide behind some other things that maybe we don't always get the luxury to do. But it is a statewide issue, and it's not just a Richmond, Petersburg, and Norfolk issue.
I agree. I really think the State Department folks can be on our side. If we want Saturday school, we want after school, I think they can be on our side and help us. I regret that Dr. King and his administration, the whole time they've been here, have lived under the umbrella of the potential of someone who, not knowing how to do it, is planning to take their schools over. And now we can say that umbrella's gone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ringer, for coming over to
Thanks for having me.
Item 2.02, fiscal year 2016 budget planning. One of the things we talked about as we were scheduling our first public budget hearing, which would have taken place this month, but we decided to move it to November, and with good reason. And one of the things we thought would be a good step forward would be to at least begin to frame our priorities as it relates to our budget, so that we could share that with our stakeholders, and it would be kind of a talking point for the discussions that may be held in that hearing. Now, over the last at least 5 years, the fall public budget hearing being so far away from the actual budget planning has not been very well attended. Not a lot of activity or engagement. Perhaps we can change that by at least beginning to share at a high level what our major priorities are, and again, at least it gives us some talking points for that discussion that's going to take place next month. During our agenda planning meeting, Dr. Thornton made a good recommendation. We thought that we would have the budget hearing along with the business meeting on the 12th. It would take place prior to the business meeting at 7 p.m., and then we would go right into the formal meeting agenda. We thought that was a good idea, especially given the challenge of a number of items that we have on the 5th of November in the work session, as a sort of a side note. So tonight, what Dr. Thornton will present, and hopefully we can at least agree upon, in some measure, some major priorities. We might not pinpoint, specifically how we want to land here, but we had some deferred items, and I'm sure we'll talk about that from last year's budget planning. And tonight, if we can agree upon at least the 3 or 4 major priorities for our spending and investment for next year, that will be a step in the right direction. Dr. King?
Chairman Houston, members of the board, FY 2016 budget planning, as was mentioned, will consist of discussion of proposed FY 2016 priorities. As recent as yesterday, the team came together and entered into a discussion facilitated by Dr. Thornton, who had already done some research and had been in the midst of reviewing all of the variables as deeply as possible that could impact us going forward, both opportunities as well as challenges that might come into play. But I think the significant thing for us has been and is that we are focused on guiding all of the above based on where we see us in terms of our strategic plan and strategic needs going forward. And so good discussion around that, and what you have provided for you reflects that. And I think we're in a good position to begin to have robust discussion around what the implications are for the upcoming fiscal year. With that said, I would defer to Dr. Thornton.
Thank you, Dr. King. Chairman Houston, school board members, good afternoon. You have in your packet today a two-page document that serves two purposes, one of which is to provide a very brief background for context purposes of where we are in the budget process, particularly as we begin to plan our strategies and priorities for FY16 budget. In terms of background, I won't go through all of the information you have here, but we know that since 2008, Norfolk Public Schools has experienced nearly a $25 million reduction in state funding, or 12%. So that has had a continuing impact on our ability to serve our students and community. In that same time period, we lost nearly 500 full-time equivalents, many of which were in the area of instruction and instructional support. So again, these reductions that have been made since 2008 continue to have implications for our serving our students, and staff, and community as we go forward, even into 2016 planning. And with that being said, we also know that recently the state has determined that it must go back and reforecast its state revenue picture, not only for this year, but for next year as well, a reforecast that unfortunately has resulted in and will continue to result in a reduction in the projected amount of revenue that will be available to run the Commonwealth, not only this year, but next year as well. Right now, there does not appear to be an immediate impact on K-12 funding for the current year, but we will not know the potential implications of FY16 until December, when Governor McAuliffe will release his proposed amendments to the FY16 budget for the current biennium. But this document serves a second purpose in that we must develop our approach to how we're going to prioritize our needs for next year, given the limited resources that we have. So what we've tried to do here is outline, again, as Dr. Houston and Dr. King mentioned in a very high-level way, our approach, our strategy, if you will, and ultimately what our priorities will be to achieve that strategy, or to reach that strategy. So with that being said, the approach that we will take for next year, of course, will be, we're suggesting that we do some targeted program reviews. And when I say targeted, that means that we will look at specific programs and or cost, some of which would include our major federal programs, to determine how we're utilizing those funds, the staffing models that we have for those funds, and how they align with our strategic plan. I made the distinction between a program review and a program evaluation. We don't have, at this point in time, the staff nor the resource of time to do a full scope evaluation of these programs, but we can share with the board the results of our internal reviews of how we're using what we have, and is there a more effective use of that going forward into 16. As well, we'll continue to look at our technology needs to determine what we need to do to get to that next level of technology service. We've made, in this current year, a significant investment in the infrastructure, in the hardware, and in some software. But the challenge, as you know, for next year is how do we maintain it with people? How do we support it with people? The more investment we make and the more dependent that our teachers and staff become on this technology, they need people to help them to troubleshoot, to maintain the system, so we won't experience significant downtimes. We also, Dr. King will again reconvene the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee. That school stakeholder committee will be reconvened in November, and we'll work through the presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget in February, and then that committee will also come back together after the presentation based on comments from the board, information that we receive from the state, and make any adjustments as needed. It is not the task of the committee to build the budget, but it is one of the responsibilities of the committee to provide advice, if you will, consensus around what some of the priorities, strategies, and balancing approach will be. We will also look for revenue enhancements. We know that over the last couple of years, we've seen a significant increase in Medicaid reimbursement, and that's because of the work that we've done in submitting reimbursements to the federal government. So we'll continue to identify potential revenue enhancement opportunities, particularly through our special education program and Medicaid recipients. And of course, we'll continue to look at our standards of quality to determine where we are as it relates to our levels of staffing as determined by the state, one of which we know is ITRTs. We continue to lag behind in meeting that required staffing level. So with all of that being said as the backdrop and the context, you have on the bottom of page 2 of the 2-page document a list of potential budget priorities for the board to discuss as we prepare for the pre-budget public hearing. The first of which would be, whatever we do, we need to keep in mind the importance of achieving structural balance. Simply stated, that our ongoing expenditures should be supported by ongoing revenues. We cannot continue to, if you will, live off of one-time revenues. So we will once again be forced to make some very difficult decisions. We've begun to wean ourselves off of that the last couple of years, but we will have to do more of that effort going forward in 2016. Second, competitive employee compensation for both instructional and support staff. The board heard loud and clear and acknowledged the concerns of our school bus transportation staff, among the many others who have concerns about their compensation. And third, facility maintenance and improvement. Over these last 7 or 8 years, since 2008, one of the areas that has been significantly reduced has been our repair and maintenance budgets within Mr. Gay's facilities operation. Again, we cannot continue down the path of not having adequate funds to support our aging infrastructure. So we're going to have to make some tough decisions in that area, whether it be major maintenance and or preventive maintenance. Fourth, the continued implementation of the 5-year strategic plan. Year 3 action plans are beginning to take shape, so some of them will require some funding support. And of course, deferred or unfunded needs that Dr. King and Dr. Houston mentioned as well. The ITRT positions to meet SOQ, technology infrastructure support, mentioned that earlier, professional development for instructional staff and school leadership teams, the potential expansion of the preschool program, and the potential expansion of the Magic Johnson Bridgescape Open Academy, and of course the completion of the school nurse program, bringing our school nurse positions back into Norfolk Public Schools. I'd be happy to answer any questions or turn it over for the board to have dialogue.
Questions, comments?
So, Dr. Mayor,
Sure.
Dr. Thornton, in the discussion with administration in terms of revenue enhancements, was there also discussion of broadening or expanding the special programs, specialized programs at our high schools, like IB or Med Science, so that we have more opportunities for attracting students that may not be in our system now, that would come back into our system for those programs?
There hasn't been, not in recent weeks leading up to this presentation, but of course over the last couple of years, the board has talked about some of those strategies to make the school division more attractive and to bring back those citizens. At the same time, those programs come with significant cost. So as we look to increase the program offerings to attract back and of course increase our average daily membership, which should drive state funding, it's very rare that those programs just state funding alone supports those programs. So as we look to increase or expand programs, we have to have sustainable state revenue through ADM, but we also have to have local revenue to support that. So short answer, yes. The long answer will be we have to make sure that we have a clear understanding what the long-term costs of those programs are, and do we have ongoing revenue to support it.
Others? Yes.
You're going to sense that there may be a connection to my previous soliloquy to this, and there is. More time, more learning time for students is the theme I'll end with, but I'm going to lead up to it. We had our first discussion of the master milestones. Those are things that the school board over the past 6 years, since the Great Recession began, that the school board has said they wanted to do because they thought it would meet what the judge here said. What else are you going to do to help these students in high poverty schools learn? More time for the past 50 years, to my knowledge, has been what we've known, and No Child Left Behind says you need more time if you want to get our grants. Everyone says you need more time. And this item of the deferred from last year, the preschool enrollment, just was emphasized recently by a very special pilot project for younger than 5-year-old education in the city. We know our businessmen see more time is necessary. More time is what I think is critical. So as we conclude the second half of the Master Milestones conversation, my guess is there's a set of things that we may conclude that could lead to some budget requests, and I think some of them lead to more time. The preschool is one way of getting more time. That's one way. Preschool 4 first, then later preschool. But there are after-school needs that could work. There are summer school needs, Saturday school needs. There are a whole host of more time needs, and of course the legislative approach to asking if Norfolk could begin school before Labor Day. So I'm going to say that in addition to the third deferred item, for me, more time is critical. It's critical to Norfolk right now. And if I were to answer Judge Poston's question, what is Norfolk going to do? What is Norfolk going to do? More time would be what I would want. I think that more time is going to request money. Where does that go? It goes to our city council. Had it not been, over the past 5 years, my observation, for the city council filling in where the state deserted us with funding, and the federal government deserted us with funding, the city filled in. They've asked us, what do you really need? I think we're going to need some funding for more time, and I'm not just talking about some preschool handicap. I'm saying preschool spots for more, leading to all. I'm saying after-school funding, whatever that would cost. I'm saying Saturday school. I'm saying summer school. More time is what we're going to need, and I would like to say that, for me, that's the priority I have right now for what are we going to do for the existing students in the city of Norfolk. Then we've got some visionary things regarding CTE and Governor's School and other things, but more time is critical for me. I also must apologize. When we originally set the second November meeting, the business meeting, it was set for November the 19th. Subsequent to that, we planned a statewide event. I was president of AERP for 1 million members, and it was set for the 12th of November. I will miss the 12th of November meeting here, but I will express to my colleagues my priorities. But I can tell you they will include at the top of the list more time, not the least of which is to answer the question that the judge asked, what are you going to do for these students?
Thank you. So Sam, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit. So as we talk about these priorities and nothing that Dr. Thornton has shared with us is quote unquote new to us. We're aware of these needs and how important these items are for continued success and progress in NPS. Having said that, when we talk about priorities, in the spirit of that word, if we could just talk a little bit about, and I'm just going to use this framework for now, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, that at the Tier 1 level, it is essential, absolutely essential, that we do these 1 or 2 things or 3 things next year as it relates to our budget, and then following, just so that we can again begin to assign some level of priority to these items, because when I look at everything that's been said this afternoon, I think we will arrive the winter, when we're in the midst of our budget planning, and see that the plate is not going to be large enough, or the funding is not going to be enough for every single thing that we really want to do or feel we need to do, which is going to force us, as always, to really prioritize, quote unquote, our priorities, so to speak. And I remember, of course, this year, professional development, safety nets were right at the top, where you shared with us. If we don't do anything else, we have to have more safety nets. We have to have more professional development. So, given these items, what would you say today would be kind of those have-tos?
I'll begin by saying, definitely, we have no choice but to continue to stay the course as it relates to safety net needs and professional development. But I'll add by saying, it's quite evident when you consider the importance of teacher effectiveness and the things that we need to do to ensure that we continue to ramp up that path, that travel to secure the whole notion of teacher effectiveness as well as leader effectiveness. They both have implications for professional learning. Those things must continue. An extension of that is what we've alluded to throughout, the technology piece, continued infrastructure enhancement, and continued emphasis around being able to take advantage of the utilization of technology as a tool to move instruction forward. So at the core of everything that I've mentioned thus far really is the student, and the whole notion of student achievement and the notion of accelerating the rate at which we are able to close gaps around across our subgroups. Again, the safety net piece as well as the enrichment piece, so all ranges of that piece. So those are things that have been really at the top of our list, and when you consider those items, beneath those items are action steps that must be taken to ensure that they happen. And when those action steps are taken, there's a price tag.
Right.
And so, while I know I would presume that the board would ponder the notion of that I said quite a bit when you consider continued professional learning, when you consider teacher effectiveness, when you consider leadership effectiveness, when you consider the need to continue to improve the infrastructure as it relates to technology, and as well as the tool to move instruction forward through the utilization of those tools. And the piece that is major as well, and I'll end here and then we can talk further, will be around being able to attract, retain, and place staff certified and classified based on best fit, which has implications for how we pay them, salary as well as the incentive packages, whether it's healthcare or whatever the issues may be.
Okay. Thank you. Brad?
So those are not cheap.
On the cost saving side, we need to be prepared to answer questions about capacity, which alludes back to our milestone conversation. We need to be able to gauge the facility needs that we have and accurately communicate that to the city council on where we have capacity issues and where we have potential savings, if indeed we do. So I think we need to make sure that we ferret that out as quickly as possible.
Talking possible closure here.
If capable.
All right. Yes.
And I know that Dr. Thornton had mentioned three programs that he wanted to take a look at to review for possible programs to find efficiencies in those programs, the federally funded programs, the technology and compensation. But again, I know that last year the department did a look into where can we save money, a program analysis, basically. And I think that we need to continue to do that, looking at all of our programs, our computer programs, our programs that we offer to students. If there's any way that we can combine programs, then I think we need to look at that and see if we can at least offer some potential areas of savings from those perspective. And then the other thing that I think that we need to work better on is how can we, as I think Dr. King, you might have mentioned this, or maybe Dr. Houston, increase our revenue sources. And the way that I only know how to do that is through increasing our SOQ funding. I mean, that's the most obvious one to me. But if there are other ways that we can do it in renewable ways, not just a one-time grant here or relying on our Title I or our Title II funds, but if there are other ways that we can look at increasing our funding that will be long-lasting, I think we need to do that. And I will say it again, this is where I think that we can use this opportunity to explore offering educational opportunities to people who are not already in the NPS system. And I know that Dr. Savigny had mentioned that there might have been a way to do this with the pre-K program, and that we cannot charge tuition for K through 12, but perhaps pre-K falls out of that line. I think we have to explore every possibility, get creative, and start making it happen. And this year, with all of the cuts that we are going to see, starting behind the 8 ball as far as renewable options, I think that we just have to really look at creative ways of increasing our revenue sources. And I think that will be taken well by council. It'll be taken well by our stakeholders to show that while we are going to be asking for funding, we are trying to do things that will help our district sustain ourselves through all of these funding cuts.
Sorry, you knew I was waiting.
I'm sure.
Thank you. Not in any particular order, but I'd like to see us do an equity audit. I know some years ago, school board did an equity audit looking at differences in staffing, equipment, tenure, so forth in our schools, and at that time, which could have been about 10 years ago, while the audit shows some discrepancies, I don't think the board at the time acted upon it. So I'm not saying that we try to do the audit in this cycle, but I think we should look at putting funds aside to do the audit based upon what you all determine is needed to make that happen. Last year, we also talked about, at least I raised the possibility of needing some specialized legal services, that from time to time, if the superintendent of the board needs some specialized legal in addition to what we currently receive, then maybe we should take the opportunity to look at that. On the school improvement side, and really the equity audit kind of ties back to that, but at the last work session, for example, we know that Tidewater Park, as an example, moved out of priority status, which meant that funding support that they were receiving when they were in priority status moved away. And if you look over time, it just seems to be this up and down, up and down. So really, to the extent that we can provide adequate support for the Office of School Improvement, and in particular in circumstances like Tidewater Park, so that we can see sustained success if additional resources are needed, that we give that some review. Still like to get a sense of where we are with the lockbox for technology. I know it's tied to the school construction, but even if a conversation with the council would allow us to have some minimum amount that we can predict, then to me that will help address some of the questions we may have with the larger technology issue. Last year we changed our ratios at the secondary level, and I know at that time, while we said we didn't think it would have much of an impact in the classroom, I know that some of the feedback that we received at the building level was that the staffing allowed for additional support in the hallways and in the cafeteria and so forth. So whether it's revisiting those ratios or looking at other partnerships to provide safety and security in the buildings, I think it's something we should also look at. Likewise, support in the classroom, something I've heard Dr. King mention for 2 years now is that, in some schools, the need may be for, X amount of teachers in the classroom. Other schools may need less. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same at each school. So I like, to the extent that we can, if we can dig down another layer and see whether or not our current staffing levels support that type of differentiation, or whatever is the appropriate terminology is. I'd like for us to really look at that, even if it's just a pilot, to begin to perhaps target certain schools that are in the school improvement office. Then the second to the last thing I have is things we can take off the plate. I know as part of the review, if there are programs, initiatives, efforts that we can take off of the plate, whether that's central administration, principals, teachers, maybe we find ourselves spending a lot of staff time on things that we could be easing some burden. So to the extent that you all think there's any low-hanging fruit there, I'd like to look at that. And then lastly, while it notes on the on this recommendation sheet, strategic plan implementation year 3, that's a whole lot of stuff. I mean, I'm just saying, it's a lot embedded in that. And so I think it would be helpful if we could either peel back the onion, or if there's some specifics that we can look there, because technically probably everything that we've talked about thus far falls under that. But if there's some specific areas that, as Dr. Houston said, that we need to prioritize under that broad banner, I think we should try to make sure we have a good feel for what that is.
Thanks.
I think Rodney had some great suggestions, and I'll just echo one for reinforcement, and that is staffing level differentiation within the classrooms. To your point, even if it's a pilot, I think that's a great idea. Because if we had all the money in the world, I'd love to put it into the classroom with more people there to support the children, period, bar none. So I feel very strongly that even if we do pilot at a few schools, I think that's a good idea. So the realist in me also would like to ask that we also scenario plan this budget year, because Dr. Thornton, you've painted a very true picture of, we were not cut this year, but potentially we could next year. And so we can't expect that we're gonna get the same amount of money from the state this year as we did next, and or if we don't, that the city's gonna be able to make up the difference. They may not be able to. So do we need to put scenarios in place that if we have a 5% reduction, this is what happens. If we have a 2% reduction, this is what happens. If we're at par, this is what that means. So that nobody is surprised at the end of the day, if it's a 2% reduction, what doesn't get done? What doesn't happen? So that we're not, again, surprised in the community with, we had a 5% reduction, therefore we're not gonna offer X. And then there's an uproar. So I think the earlier we can communicate what may not be done under scenarios would be a good thing, and for all of us to know what those can be, because we're gonna have to prioritize those too.
Yeah, that was a great recommendation. That was a pretty common approach that we followed when we were in the midst of all the cuts since 2008. We thought we were past that, but yeah, we're back there again. So we will, for the Budget Committee, we will show probably 3 scenarios, 5, 8, and 10. Hopefully it won't come to the 10. And we will develop balancing strategies around those.
And I do agree with your approach that we need to get away from using money this year that we didn't spend into next year's budget. So if we could really, if this year we could knock it out, wouldn't that be ideal? But I do agree that that is not anything we want to live on for the rest of our lives, because that cloud will not forever be.
And I think we'll be forced down that pathway because with all the reductions that we made this past year for the current year's budget, we won't have that level of flexibility that was built up over the past few years. So we've got basically one more year, if you will, where we may have a 1.5% from FY14 operations that we can apply to next year budget, if you choose to do so, maybe $3.5 to $4 million. This year, we don't expect to generate that type of savings or budget flexibility for 17. So that, again, is going to force us to make these tough choices, either on the expenditure side or figure out how we can get new sustainable revenue. It's going to force us down that path. Thank you.
So for next month, for the budget hearing, I think it is important that we're able to say, and of course, our point is not for some form of vote, obviously, between now and next month, but I think it's important that we are able to at least express at the beginning of that budget hearing, here are the priorities that we are considering for next year as talking points, and so that at least our stakeholders know how we're thinking and they can give us their feedback, not only on those items, but on items of interest that they have as they observe and partner with us in our work. Now, the deferred items from last year did have price tags associated with them, the nurses, the ITRT positions, as well as the technology system engineers, and the preschool program expansion. I'd like us to also consider whether or not we want to make sure that some of these items are definitely included in next year's budget, if that's the way we feel, so that, again, step by step, as we have these conversations leading up to February, by the time we get the superintendent's recommended proposed budget, we at least as a board have a very clear idea of some items that we definitely want to be included, again, especially those that were deferred from last year, knowing already what those costs are. Okay. So are there any of the items that's been presented from the administration or from our colleagues that anyone disagrees with as we begin to form then a summary statement that will lead off the budget public hearing? Because what I'd like to be able to do is to say to our stakeholders, here's what we're thinking right now based on our initial conversation during this kind of pre-budget planning time. These are the areas of focus, and some of these are related in that they will be kind of couched under major topic headings. You follow what I'm saying? But it would, again, at least inform the public as to what our priorities are currently, and we'll boil them down more as we move into January and February and get closer to the actual proposed budget. Yes, Noel?
I just want to make sure that we highlight as a board the priority number 2 that Dr. Thornton has mentioned here, competitive employee compensation, instructional and support staff.
Okay.
Because we have received commentary from our bus drivers, from our nutrition employees, and going on to staff. And I want them to know that we have heard them, that we understand what their needs are, and that we are actively looking at ways to address competitive employee compensation. I remember last year that because it wasn't explicitly brought out in the beginning, that there was some concern that we weren't thinking about it. But always, it's definitely on my mind. What can we do to, as Dr. King said, attract and retain those persons who are in the building working directly with the students? So I just want to make sure that it's very clear that we're looking at that, and that we're just trying to be smart about how we are making the next steps as far as salary, raises, compensation, etc.
Okay. All right, Ms. Warren?
I'm going to miss the 12th of November meeting. So let me remind you what I said earlier, because this is for the 12th. 3 things. More time. National School Boards Association said you need more time. CUBE says you need more time. VSBA says you need, everyone says if you don't have more time, it's not going to happen. Second, under our milestones conversation, Dr. King, there are several items that may fit into that, and as we explore next first meeting of November that, it could be that many of these could coordinate together for more time. And finally, the third one, more time. Not all of this has to occur at once. Our focus schools, it could be fair to provide some of our most needy students at our most needy school this time, and it could be some grants, although they can't be replicated every year, could help us begin that. So the City Council, again, took up the slack for the state and the federal government deserting us over the past 5 or 6 years during the recession. The City Council funded our reading and math specialists when we said we need it for this. If we said we need more time, I'm talking about after school, summer school, Saturday school, in addition to starting school before Labor Day, in addition to some of the other things that we could do. I think the City Council would hear that. Would it be more? Yes. Where could that more be garnered from? There is the potential for supplemental appropriation to handle some of these deferred items, which is what we'll talk about at the next milestones chat. Supplemental appropriation can handle some of the deferred transportation, some of the deferred maintenance, some of the deferred technology. That could be done as a one-time only. But for the reoccurring budget, more time is going to have to be there. So I apologize if this is a rehashing of it, but since I'll miss you on the 12th, my first top 3 things are more time, and more time for kids to learn.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
And so when we talk about more time, of course, obviously there would have to be a plan that can be priced, which
I
would,
think Dr. King has already said that by January he could present some possible scenarios for that, because that was one of our master milestone chats last time.
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay.
If not before.
All right. Any more comments or questions for this item? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thornton.
Thank you all.
Okay, our next few items of business are closed session items. And so I'd like a motion to go into closed session, please.
Move. Second.
Ms. Banks, properly moved and seconded.
It has been moved and properly seconded that the members of the school board and the superintendent go into a closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for the quarterly evaluation of the superintendent as authorized for executive session by Virginia Code section 2.2-3711A1 for the discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of Norfolk Public Schools, including consideration of the personnel docket of this date. For consideration or discussion of disciplinary matters concerning students in Norfolk Public Schools, specifically the pupil personnel docket of this date, and for consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members, consultants, or attorneys pertaining to actual or probable litigation or other specific legal matters requiring provision of legal advice by counsel. Dr. Houston?
Aye.
Ms. Doyle?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Reverend Haywood?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson?
Aye.
Dr. Stewart?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. We'll have a brief break, take about 10 minutes, and then we'll be ready to continue on.
You know what?
Are you there, Master?